You might have to refresh so it will let you in.
Oh, good, there I am. You see me?
Not yet.
I see me. Should I click where it says join with video?
Yes. Are you on your laptop?
Yeah.
Okay, there you are. Hold on.
I've got two. Oh, here you are.
Hey.
Hey. Okay, Sean.
Okay, so I was muted, so I'm not muted. So you hear me okay?
Let's hang up. Let's hang up on the phone.
Okay. Done.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, there you are.
Okay, so I'll just wait. And the participant says two, that's you and me?
Yes, and I'm about to let some people in.
Okay, so I'll just wait here and as people show up, and then at 1:30 we'll get the meeting started.
Yes, and I'll go ahead and make you a co-host.
Okay,
That way you'll be able to share your screen.
so let me ask you a technical question. On the chat thing,
Yes, sir.
can I respond on the chat?
Absolutely. You just click the chat icon
Okay.
and
So
see how it opens up the group chat on the right.
Uh-huh.
On the
And
bottom
so-
it says type message here.
So that's how I would respond?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, good. And I can just close that, so.
Nope, you don't.
No, I don't want to do that. Okay, so how do I close the chat?
You can just click on it, click on chat again
Okay,
on the bottom where all the icons are.
okay, yeah, good, okay. So we got three people. Got somebody signed on?
Marcia's here.
Marcia.
She's muted. She's got us muted though.
Hi, Marcia.
It's okay. We love her anyways.
Okay,
Just let me
good.
share my email.
So now I'll just wait for people to show up.
Yep, and I'll stay on here and just admit people as they come on. We still have a little bit of time, so.
Good, yeah, we do.
And then,
So everybody will have that packet that Julie sent out. And because that's what I'm going to be talking about in the class is the material in the packet.
yes. Julie, did you send that to me?
Julie, did you send that to Lori?
I sent it to the Market Center. Are you on that email? If not, I
Yes.
can send it to you. Okay, then you should have gotten it.
Okay, do me a favor and forward it to my email. That way I have it as an attachment as well. So
Okay.
if people in the meeting say they didn't get it, I can go quickly forward it to them.
Okay, I'll go send it to you.
Thank
Okay, good.
you. Okay,
Okay,
we'll hang out till 1:30.
that sounds cool. How are you doing all remotely?
I'm doing good.
Now, are you up in McKinney?
No, sir, I'm in Salina.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, how are things in Salina? Is everybody keeping their distance?
for the most part. My husband's
Yeah.
in law enforcement, so he's out.
Oh,
out
gosh.
today, yeah, so
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be a little bit nerve wracking,
it is.
especially for you.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. But
That's kind of a challenge. I know when I went into Walmart this morning over by our office, they had it kind of set up a little differently as you kind of went in one of the doors. It said, go to the other door. And it was really interesting. I think people are being much more aware of the social distancing because they
Yeah.
were really being very careful. You could almost see people as you're going down the aisle kind of wait till you got through the aisle before they would go through. They were being very
Yeah.
careful on the distancing. So people are really beginning to adjust to this, I think.
well, the more we do it, the sooner this thing will pass.
I hope so. Because, my gosh, this is just hard for all of us. I know. It's a
trying
challenge.
time for everyone.
Yep. And, it's just, and all the remote stuff that we're doing. And I think it's interesting. I was talking to one of my, to some people down at Texas Realtors, one of the people in the professional development. And I was saying that I think a lot of the things that we're forced to do now, that later when this is over, we'll find that some of those things are really best practices and we'll continue them. So I'm
Absolutely.
learning some new things now that I'll make use of later that I wouldn't have thought to do.
For sure.
So this will be really good.
Who knew you would
Okay.
be teaching Zoom?
I know. Well, yeah, for sure. I just, but hey, I'm committed to really understanding this whole technology thing better and better. Let me
great.
ask you, on my little icon down at the bottom here says share screen. What does that do?
So if you had, let's say you had a presentation or you had a sheet of paper or something on your computer that you wanted us to see,
Uh-huh.
you could share your screen, and instead of us seeing you, we would see your computer screen.
So like if I had something, because I've got two monitors here, if I pull something up on off the TAR website or something and had it on that monitor, I could share the screen and it would show that monitor.
Yeah, let's test it while we've got some time. If you want to pull something up.
Okay, let me see if I can find something here. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a form. And this is the new COVID ID addendum from Texas Realtor. So that's what shows up on that second monitor. So if I push share screen, screen one,
Yeah, just hit share screen and let's see what it looks like.
okay.
Okay, so now I can see the information concerning the use of COVID-19 addendum. So that works, yep.
Okay, how come this thing popped up with, it says Zoom join a meeting again? Oh, never mind, just popped. Okay, so,
So that's how you would share the screen.
okay, but now how do I get back to,
So then if you want to unshare, you'll click where it says share screen again.
I don't have that on the thing anymore.
So hit your escape button on your laptop, or actually just hover your mouse over the Zoom call, and that thing will pop back up.
Okay, so I don't, over the Zoom call,
Just try hitting escape on your laptop.
I do that and nothing happens there.
Okay, so when you hit share screen,
So I don't have that stuff at the bottom. I don't have that
Okay.
whole screen.
okay, so you need to, let's see. Okay, Julie, come in here and see if you can hit on the top. Does it say view options?
No, it looks like he's backed all the way out of the meeting almost. Oh, okay.
No, he's in there. He's,
Yeah, I'm
'cause I
over
can see
here.
his- I can see him.
Hit the three dots.
Okay, hit the three dots.
And then what, can you hit view option?
Mm-mm.
Nope.
You can hide, you can mute, stop video, rename, but none of that other stuff.
Okay, so looking at his screen on the very top, you don't see a green bar that says you're sharing your screen?
Mm-mm.
Nope.
No.
Julie, I'm gonna FaceTime Bob on his phone so I can see what he's looking at.
Okay. Wait, you're over there. Hold on. Hey, I think I just figured it out.
Okay,
It's just the bar. He's got double screens and the bar is on the other screen.
yes.
Okay.
So
So
hit
how do I
view
get back?
option.
How do I get back to where I've got the Zoom call?
So do you see where it says view options on that bar on the top? Julie?
Pause share.
Hit the three.
It doesn't have a view option.
Or does it say anything like stop sharing screen?
I do have a stop share.
Yeah.
Click that. There you go.
Okay.
Now you're back to regular screen.
And then there's all the bars and everything. Now you're
Yeah, I
back
got
on
that all
one
back.
screen.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I may not try that because they've got that in the packet.
Okay. Well, and if they have it, they're good then.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they should have all
And I
that.
did post on Facebook that they could email me or let me know if they can't get it, and I'll email them the stuff, and you can as well. So
Perfect.
I did email you those handouts. So
Perfect.
hopefully we'll be good to go.
Okay.
Hey, look, Mr. Jim is on.
Hey, Jim
Hey.
Bartz.
Hey, Bob, how you doing there?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Awesome. Pretty good.
Okay. Marcia, Norma, Karen. Okay. Well, while we're waiting everybody to show up, I'm going to walk down the hall for a second.
Careful. None of that. Oy.
Brian DeLuca just sent me and you an email, and I forwarded him the sign on.
Okay, yeah, he sent another one like right after saying he was good, that
Oh,
it
okay.
had worked.
Good.
But yes. So, and somebody needed it on Facebook, so I sent it to him. So
Okay.
hopefully we're good. I said, everybody, please be patient. We're on a learning curve.
Absolutely. We're all learning Zoom as we go, so
Yes, very much. Oh, my goodness. So how's life remotely, Lori?
it's good. I mean, I miss everybody in the office,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's been good. How are your kiddos? Oh, you have your son?
I have a son and a daughter.
Oh.
Yeah, and she's immune compromised, so they're pretty much locked at home. So
Oh, goodness.
yeah. So just trying to keep everybody healthy, but otherwise they're doing good.
Well, good. Home is the best place to be right now.
Yep, exactly. All right, you ready for your chair back?
Absolutely.
All right.
One of the things that I have to keep remembering, my laptop is right off here to the left. So I
Yeah.
need to look at that because I tend to be looking at my monitor.
Yeah.
And so I have to work through that and deal with it. So
It's all good.
yes, it is. So as people show up, if I wanted to click on somebody, is there any reason why when they want to talk, they can
They can unmute.
unmute themselves?
Yes. And I'll stay on, Bob, to just kind of monitor the chat, because people will
Okay.
ask questions through the chat. So I'll just kind of be your eyes on that.
Okay, excellent. Great. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
I appreciate that. And if we run into some serious troubles, we know to call Dick Dillingham, right? Because
That's
he'll be our guy that'll really fix it.
all right.
'Cause I understand that before we brought Eddie on to help us, that he had to interview with Dick to make sure that he really did know how it worked.
Yep.
So glad we have a running joke
Yeah, well.
or multiple.
We've got 12 now,
Yeah.
and there's Sally. Hello, Sally.
Sweet Miss Sally.
And Teresa, Dan. So they have the ability to change their name. Like originally mine just showed B Baker and I changed it to Bob Baker.
Yes.
Once you sign in, you can put your name up there.
Because that way, because sometimes when I see their name. Hello, John Powell. I don't know.
There they are.
Yeah.
are way down despite this immense demand for actual emergency treatment for people with COVID-19. So the revenue streams.
What is that?
So I unmuted everybody for a second so they can say hello to you.
Okay.
Hey, Bob.
Hello. How we doing? In our remoteness.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Miss Sally.
I feel remote.
Yeah, well, good. Looks like you have your own little studio there with all your office stuff, and that's good.
That's just the part you can see.
Yeah, well, and you know what? And Lori, confirm if I'm right on this. We need to remind everybody that we can see them.
Absolutely.
So they need to be careful what they do.
Unless they turn us off on video, we can certainly see them.
Yeah. It's kind of, I especially worry about people like Tommy Thompson and Pete Kerrigan, because no telling what they'll do.
Need water or anything? I know you have a coat. Do you need?
I think I'm good with that so far. Okay. So unless you need her for something else, I'm going to probably let Julie go on because she's got to go take care of some other things for me.
No, we're good. We're good here. We'll get started in about 2 minutes.
Okay, and I'll be monitoring the email as well if I need to do anything. So.
Perfect.
Just out of curiosity, did you guys get the email with the packet in it? Because we're going to talk about the material.
I didn't.
Yes.
You didn't get it? Sally, did you get it?
It probably got sent. I've been doing a search all morning for a buy.
Okay. Oh, okay. For clients?
Yeah.
That sounds okay to me.
And
So,
I'll take notes. I'll take notes.
okay. Well, and you've got Jim on the call. He could take notes, work through that.
He's in a different room.
Okay, good. Hello, John Powell.
Hello,
How are you doing, sir?
I am fine.
So, Lori, why do some people's picture just show up?
Those are the people that I'm letting in the meeting.
Okay. Hello, Jim Ellis. Jaylyn. Okay. Hello, Ron McCoy. So we are at 1:30. Lori, what do you think? Should we give a little more time for a few more?
Nope, I would say let's get going and I'll
Okay.
admit them as they're joining.
Okay, so first of all, thank all of you very much for being on my very first Zoom class. So thank you for your patience and working with me. And I especially thank Lori for continuing to be here to kind of work through all the little things going through it. Hopefully you have the materials that were emailed out to you, because we're going to talk about the coronavirus materials. We're going to talk about that, plus a couple of other topics that I talked about in my email. And as always in my classes, we really encourage the questions and have you go through everything so that we can all do it. One of the things that's really important as we go through all of this is that we can share the experiences that we're having on how we're adjusting to this, how we're dealing with showings, both from the listing side and the buyer side, and the extra precautions we're taking. Some have had some really good experiences. One of the things that make sure before somebody actually does a showing for whatever listings that they have to first go into a virtual tour. And so that's a requirement. So we're going to see that type of thing happen more and more often so that when we have people actually see a piece of property, that they're much more informed, that they know what they're doing, and they're not just tire kickers. And so I think we're going to see some practices come out of this that are probably good things that we should be doing anyway, as we kind of work through it. So I'd like to start off with, we've got these advisories that we had sent out last week, and it's also in the email that we sent. And I want us to make sure that we have these and that we'll use them with our buyers and sellers. So one, we have a COVID-19 advisory notice that we use for sellers. If I hold this up, Lori, do they see this?
Yes, they can see it, but it's kind of blurry.
Okay, but at least they kind of see, here's what I'm talking about, but they should have their own. So everybody should be familiar with this. And the concept of this COVID-19 advisory notice for sellers is that your sellers, you give this to them and they sign off on it and you sign off on it, make sure they have a copy. And this talks about some of the guidelines and some of the practice that we're going to do to help protect them. Now, clearly, one of the things, and this is talked about in the 4-page advisory to the agents, one of the things that we, if you got a listing, you need to spend time with your individual seller and talk to them about how they want to go through this, how they want to deal with access to the property, what do they want their guidelines to be. You can put these in MLS, you can put these in the showing instructions, you can have those at the house. I'd really be interested to see how many of you are going through the process on showings on your listing, whether you have protective gear there that you're making use of, and how we're working through that, because that's going to be really important. But it's going to be key that we tailor this to every individual client, certainly to our sellers on how they want people to access the property, also with our buyers and what we say here are the rules on showing the property. And we'll talk more about that when we get to that second advisory and the advisory to the agents. Clearly, your requirements will be different if you've got a couple still living in the house, particularly you've got an elderly couple who still lives there. They may want to be incredibly cautious on people accessing their property. And they may be very appreciative of the fact that people are going to view their property remotely through tours and so forth. In fact, you know, it may even be a requirement that even before somebody entertains somebody on offer a contract, that they've gone through that process and done that. A vacant house is a little bit easier, but still doesn't mean there's not risk. People touching things, people doing things. The word we get from all the experts out there is a pretty significant range of how long this virus can last on inanimate objects. And some people are saying, you know, many, 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 many days. So we need to be very careful as you go through that, which is why when we look at some of our other things, anytime you've got a showing on your property, you need to take certain actions before the showing and certain actions after the showing to clean and to work through that as you work through it. So make sure that on the advisory notice for the seller, for every listing you've got, you've talked to your seller, you've gone through that process, you've had them sign off on it, and you've got a copy and they've got a copy. Same thing on your advisory notice to buyers. And when you're working with the buyers, they need to be aware that this is a different world now and how we're actually accessing properties. You'll encourage your buyers to be able to, and you'll help them be able to view the properties remotely. I think they'll really appreciate that before they go out and spend time physically viewing properties. One, it'll be a better use of everybody's time, but it'll also be safer. So you need to make sure that they work through this. The good news is, as this has expanded, people are becoming much more cooperative. You know, the feedback that we're getting is that people are very appreciative of these steps, of the things that we're doing. And so we're finding people being very cooperative in all these. And frankly, if you've got someone who is just not cooperative and considers this whole thing a big joke, that's clients you can't afford to have. You need to be prepared to move on because it puts you at risk, puts your family at risk, puts all of us at risk. And this is even aside from just the sheer legal liability. The other human side of this is something we really need to be more aware of as we kind of work through that. So please be aware of the two advisories, one for sellers, one for buyers, and be prepared to use those for all your listing and for all your buyers you're going to work with. When I talk to my broker friends and other companies, everybody has something like this. So, one of the friends that I've got in a RE/MAX office, he said, and it's not his form, it's another RE/MAX office, and it's 9 pages that they have to sign off on before they'll work with them. And so some people out there have gotten really serious about what they're doing. So frankly, 2 one-page forms like this, while we think it's still a good idea and a good thing, is not a huge challenge as we work through it. And I want to be sure that I have the ability to see if you've got any questions or anything. And Lori can help me figure out how we know if you've got questions, how you raise your hand, and how you do that. But if you've got any questions so far, is everybody good with where we are so far? Okay.
So what I did, Bob, is I've asked everybody to use our group chat for questions, and I'll monitor that for you as well.
Wonderful, wonderful.
There is one
Okay.
question. Luke is asking if anyone finding PPE available out there to provide to our clients.
What is PPE? What is PPE? I don't know what that is.
Personal
Bob,
protection
It's
equipment.
protective gear.
Oh, protective gear? Okay,
Personal protection equipment.
okay. As it makes sense now that you say it, yeah, okay, that's what that is clearly. I don't know, what is everybody finding? Are they finding resources for this? Everybody having, for the booties and the gloves and things like that? Anybody have any good suggestions on that?
Gloves, mask, maybe booties.
Yeah, certainly, sure. Certainly on listings, having that protective gear available as people come in would be good. Is anybody finding any good resources for that out there?
Bob, you might check with the paint supplies like Sherwin-Williams for the booties and such.
That's a good idea. Yeah,
That's where I bought mine previously before all this hit for open houses, and they were very reasonable.
okay, good. Paint stores. And I guess also maybe Office Depot, Office Max, places like that might have some things we don't normally think about that. Maybe even like Home Depot, Lowe's.
We
Might have
found
some
gloves at Lowe's.
Oh, gloves at Lowe's. Okay, good idea.
I found them at Walmart, but you have to go real early.
Yeah, real early. When it first, oh yeah, good point. Good ideas, guys. Anything else you think of?
Bob, kind of on that note, I found a woman that's making the kind of chemical grade that is supposed to be equivalent to what we can't find. So I just was wondering if it is like the hand sanitizers are hard to find. So if we're making those, is that something that's okay to do, to put into a listing?
That's a good question. I guess one of the things that we'd want to be careful of is to make sure if we create some on our own hand sanitizers, that there's not anything that someone could have an allergic reaction to. Certainly anything we use in a seller's home, they need to approve it. We need to make sure they don't have some asthma situation or some allergic reaction or anything. So we'd want to take that precaution. But if we can't find some otherwise and we can get that and it's safe, I think that's certainly an extra effort we could certainly make.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Anything else? Good ideas, everybody.
Some of the liquor distilleries, Bob, are preparing hand sanitizer as well.
Okay, so you're hanging out in the liquor stores and the paint houses. So there's a trend here I'm working through. That's good. That's good for you to know. So the liquor stores have what for you?
Hand sanitizers. They're starting to make hand sanitizers at a lot of the, not liquor stores, but the distilleries.
Oh, okay. Okay. So then they'll make them available through some outlet?
Yes,
Okay.
they're actually doing it through their distillery, and
Okay.
there have been several that have been on the news that have talked about doing it, and some of them are even donating it to the public.
Okay. So I guess we just need to find out where we could access those.
Mhm.
So Marcia is asking if we use hand sanitizers that we made, are we then liable if something happens? And the answer would be yes. What we would have to do if we're going to use a homemade hand sanitizer, we need to make sure that it truly is environmentally safe, and that if it's going to be in a home that you've got listed, that your seller has approved it, because that's where your first thing is. It might be something that your seller would have an allergic reaction to, or their children, or somebody like that. So you want to be extra cautious. You ought to be able to do hand sanitizers that have nothing caustic in it. There really is very safe materials. But still, Marcia's right. If we use something that we've created that's not, we don't get from the store or whatever, and something happens, I think we do have liability. So we want to be very careful on that as you work through it. So that's some good suggestions as you work through it. Okay, and I see something from Laura. What does it say? What did you say, Laura? Because I got your question got covered up.
Can you clarify the governor's orders mean showings? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
can you
let's
clarify the
yeah,
governor's order?
sure. Let's talk about that a little bit. And Christy and I talked a little bit earlier about that, and Christy and Mike and Dick have had some conversations. We got a lot of really good material. We're very fortunate in our office to have Marvin Jolly, who, as you know, is in the leadership at Texas Realtors. And they've been working very, very hard on this to give some guidance to the realtors. Lori Levy, who's the general counsel for Texas Realtors, and Travis Kessler, CEO, and the leadership team have had a lot of meetings and have talked at length about this. And they've really stopped a little short of actually saying, here are the best practices that you really should do. Because one of the concerns is that if Lori Levy, general counsel for TAR, says, here's the best practice, and we do it and something happens that creates a problem, she says, we've got too much liability. So she says, here's some practices, here's some ideas, here's some thoughts. What it's really come down to, though, is they really are saying every individual brokerage is going to have to make a decision on what they'll do.
You have to be connected to Wi-Fi for it to work at all.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Not even wirelessly.
Like, how do you even
Okay.
connect it to what?
I've just lost you. What's happening?
I just muted somebody, Bob. They were,
Okay.
it was background noise.
Okay. And so it's going to come down to an individual brokerage. And here's the challenge. You know, we've got this at the state level, we got the governor's order, which appears to make us an essential business. And there are those who have an opinion that as we're an essential service, that overrides what the counties and even the cities do. We don't know if that's true or not. Here's what we've got to do, and we will be sending something out to all the agents, hopefully sooner rather than later, because what we need for the agents to do, the balance we've got on the one side is to absolutely dictate to you, here's what you can and cannot do. As most of you know, that's really not our style. Our style is to let you run your business. Our style is to give you good information so you can make good risk-based decisions, letting you know. A good example, we think the most stringent guidelines probably in our area, one is Dallas County, and the second what the city of McKinney has just recently done. And so to me, it would be an easy thing to say, you probably shouldn't be showing houses in Dallas County. You certainly probably shouldn't be holding open houses in Dallas County. But I don't think our leadership here wants to say to you, you're prohibited. That's an absolute ban. You can't do it. What we want to do is we want you to acknowledge, and this will be what we send out to you, that you understand the risk to you and to your clients. Think about the challenge you're going to have if you've got your buyers and you're showing them a house in Dallas County and the constable shows up and arrests all of you. Not something we want to have happen. But that's a risk. We've already had stories that yesterday, someone in Plano, which has a very liberal situation as far as I know, that some police were stopping people in Plano, asking them, you know, why are you out? What are you doing? So we're going to have that type of thing. We're going to have anecdotal information that tells us we've got to be very careful. You know, we know what the Dallas County order says. We provide that information. You've got it out there. We've got it on our intranet. We've got all the advisories that we're going to talk about today, as well as the new COVID-19 addendum from Texas Realtors. We've got all that on the intranet. So you have access to that information. And as you make risk-based decision, it's a risk to you, it's a risk to the clients. And frankly, in addition to the legal liability, maybe there's also just the health risk that needs to be considered. That we go out and we expose ourselves to situations. You take a buyer out and you go show them properties down in Dallas, which Dallas has an enormous number of cases. That's going to be a huge risk. And if your buyer, gets COVID-19 as a result of you showing them how Dallas County, from a pure just personal human standpoint, it's not a good situation. So we need to be incredibly cautious as we do that. Right now, from a brokerage standpoint, we want to support you as you build your business. We want you to have safe practices, certainly safe distancing. We want you to make some good decisions. We'll make you aware of, and already have on the intranet and on the emails we send out, what the different orders say. But you're going to have to make a decision in concert with your client. And it's very important that it's not just a risk you're taking. It's also a risk your client is taking. And so you need to make sure you've had that conversation with them. You've got the advisory that you'll have the buyer sign off on and work through that process. And you need to be able to work through and to deal with that. So I wish I had a definitive saying, absolutely, you cannot show here, you cannot hold an open house there. We're not going that far. We're going to say, hey, be aware of the risk. Let us know that you're aware of the risk, and let us know that you've advised your client that you're aware of the risk. So that's a lot of answer to that one little question. So give me your feedback. We really need to know how you're viewing this and what you want us to be able to do in this. So give me some good feedback here, please. Okay, who's talking?
I can talk.
Okay.
My associate got a form from her broker to carry in her car, certifying that she is employed by an essential services organization, so that when the police stop her, she's able to show that document to them. Could we possibly get something like that to carry in our cars?
Okay, that's a great request. I don't have any problem with us producing something for all. You can pull it down, or we just email it out to you, from us as the brokerage, that you are performing acts as an essential service, and then you could have that and keep that in your car. So if we did get stopped, you'd have that. I think it's a good idea, Sally. We certainly can do that.
Hey, Bob, this is Sean Wade Casey.
Yes, sir.
Christopher Sullivan at Alamo Title last week presented a very similar document, and he sent that out to agents that were on one of his calls that basically outlined something similar. I don't know, I haven't seen a revised copy since things have changed a little bit, but I know that he as a lawyer had produced a very similar document to what Sally had talked about.
Yeah.
That I was able to print, and I actually have it in my car now that says that real estate agents are essential. But I think he might have revised it since then, because Dallas had changed their rules shortly after he presented that.
Okay.
I know that some of the lawyers at some of the title companies have talked about something similar to what Sally was talking about.
Okay. Thanks, Sean. Is his name on there somewhere?
His name, I don't know. I don't have it in my card, Bob. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
I
So
was looking for it while we were talking on my computer, but I didn't find it.
So here's my thought. And I think we're going to see a lot of these. Back, we're going to talk in a minute about the different forms and so forth that we're seeing out there from different other brokerages. And I want us to be on the same page and be consistent in what we use. I think that if you had something from your brokerage about essential services, that would probably carry a little bit more weight than just something that had that statement that maybe some attorney or a title company person, even somebody that's well known, produced. Does that make sense? That it would be better if it came from your brokerage saying, so and so is an agent, independent contractor with our brokerage, and is in fact performing essential services, and that we've identified real estate as essential service. Does that make sense to have something more along those lines from your brokerage as opposed to using a different form?
Absolutely, Bob. I think so.
Okay. Sounds good. because let's talk a little bit about the different forms. I was interacting with one of my agents, or one of the agents in the Rockwall office, and he had actually was using an access form, and we're going to talk in a minute about the Texas Realtors new access form, and he was using one that he actually got from a RE/MAX agent who had created that. And while I appreciate him doing something, what we don't want is for all of us to just be at a hodgepodge using different forms that we come across from other brokerages and other things. We want to be on the same page with the forms that we use, but we don't want to ignore other good ideas out there. If you come across something like what Sean came across that you think is something we need to take a look at, then please go ahead and send that in to us so leadership can take a look at it and see if we need to make use of some of that in creating our own forms. So help us out with that. The input that we get from you is going to be really valuable as we work through this. Does that make good sense? Other thoughts there? Okay, so we talked about the seller advisory, the buyer advisory. And as we go through this, you guys, be sure to interrupt, because Lori's there keeping track on everybody, so we make sure we touch on everybody's concerns. And you've got the 4-page advisory to agents, and it's got some really important information in there that gives you instructions on preparing a home, preparing the buyers. We've heard this from a number of our agents. You know, most listing agents, most sellers, that one of the things that they're saying is when people access it, they don't want children with the buyers, because it's really hard to keep children from touching things. They only want the actual buyers, and in many cases they're controlling. If there are children, they say, okay, here's a couple. You know, the husband stays out with the kids while the wife goes in, and the wife stays with the kid, husband goes in, things of that nature. And certainly, if you do any open houses, you've got to control how many people come in. That's one of the big things, is controlling people congregating and having too many people. So we need to make sure that we're on top of that. So please read through that advisory to the agents and make sure that those concepts and ideas in there are things that make sense to you. And if you want to add to those, recognizing this is very much a work in progress, but as we want to add to those things, we certainly can make adjustments and do that. Any questions on the advisory to agents that by now everybody has spent a great deal of time studying and reviewing? And right, was that right? Am I right on that? Okay, good. Any questions on that? Now, I do want to, one of the things you've got in your package is a COVID-19 addendum from Texas Realtors. This is an addendum that you need to be really familiar with. Certainly, if you represent a buyer, then your buyer needs to be aware of this addendum and the possibility of using it. If you represent a seller, you need to be familiar with this, so that if you get an offer with this addendum on it, you understand what it does to your seller. The challenge with this particular addendum is it tends to favor the buyer. It creates an automatic delay in paragraph A, a 30-day delay, and it has a phrase in there that's a little challenging. If they can't perform, according to paragraph 9, can't have a closing on time due to a voluntary or mandatory buyer's quarantine, voluntary or mandatory. So somebody could just think they don't feel right and say, well, I'm going to quarantine myself. That could cause an automatic 30-day delay in closing. That could be huge. So when your seller is considering an offer with this addendum, you need to have a really good conversation with your seller and what their circumstances are, if in fact they've got to close at a certain point in time to be able to buy another house. They've got a really tight timeline. So you need to have that conversation with your seller and help them understand the risk. Now, having said that, even aside from the use or non-use of the addendum, we need to begin to have better questions of buyers and buyers agents. It's reasonable to ask questions like what the buyer does. And this may be a conversation you have with the buyer's lender. because buyers that are in certain kinds of businesses may be more subject to the impact of the COVID-19 than other people. Someone may be with a large company, and we've already seen in the news where many of them have been furloughed and laid off and whatever. We need to be aware of it. There's no question there's a risk where the addendum is used or not. So we need to be much more in tune with what the buyer's circumstances are in a situation. Certainly, as you represent the buyer, if your buyer, you need to have the conversation with your buyer. If they're in a risk situation, then they need to be aware if they don't use this addendum, they could be in danger of defaulting and as a minimum losing their earnest money. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the class about the earnest money issue. But you need to be very familiar with this COVID-19 addendum and be able to use that and certainly help your buyer understand it. So if your buyer says, yeah, I think that's a good, safe thing to do. Now, if your buyer is interested in a hot piece of property and there's a lot of offers on it, this is going to really impact on the how attractive their offer is or is not. Because sellers who really have been educated by their listing agent and understand this form may be very reluctant to use this form or to accept an offer this form. So your buyer needs to understand this could really cloud their offer significantly. And while it does have a situation in there on the closing, a third-day closing, that's not the only contingency. In paragraph B of the addendum, it has a situation that even if we're past the financing contingency in paragraph 2A of the third-party financing addendum, you have a timeline in there. Let's say you've got 15 days, and that 15 days is come and gone. Hello. So that 15 days is come and gone. And so you're 20 days into the deal, and all of a sudden, as a result of the virus issue, the buyer loses their income or they can't get the loan or whatever due to that. They can get out of the contract and get their earnest money back. So that contingency relating to coronavirus can continue past the number of days in a third-party financing addendum in paragraph 2A. So we need to be aware that that's there. Some other brokerages have created a similar form. Ebby, for example, has their own COVID-19 addendum that's similar to this, although it tends to be a little more fair for both sides, seller and buyer, but it also creates a situation where it kind of creates a fluid situation. So if you've got a seller who has a tight situation, he needs to be aware of some of the challenges with this particular form. Questions on this? We have the seller, house went under contract before there was COVID-19. Question being what? Sally, do you have a question on this? Sally, can you unmute yourself?
Her question
I'm
is,
trying to. Okay, the question is, do I still need to go over this with my seller? Because potentially the buyer, even though this didn't exist at the time we went under.
Yeah, this is brand new. It just came out last week.
But the buyer could still jerk this up and.
No, well, the buyer has no automatic COVID-19 right to terminate if this addendum is not used. So the buyer can also. So no, because it hadn't been in most transactions out there that are older than a week, this addendum wasn't even there. Every addendum was about the same timeline, a little bit earlier. So chances are you're in a transaction where this addendum is not being used. So
it hadn't.
So the challenge is, on the one level, the buyer doesn't have this right of termination or right to extend a closing that's in the addendum. Doesn't mean that the buyer might not have a COVID-19 issue that keeps him from closing, but they'll be in default. This addendum keeps the buyer from being in default if they have a COVID-19 issue. If this addendum is not being used, then the buyer could be in default and the seller would take actions according to paragraph 15 of the contract. And I did think, and I think last time I checked it, this addendum was in fact on the intranet. And when I checked it and pulled down the list of all of when you pull the internet and go under documents, it's on that second page, but it was there last time. And it's also in, I understand it's also now in Command and DocuSign, so it should be there. If not, if you'll, after we finish this class, if you'll send me an email, I'll make sure we get a copy to you. But in the material that Julie sent out for this class, this is part of the material that's in the class. So you should have it there somewhere.
I have a copy of this.
Okay, so one,
I want to know if my seller should be worried in case the buyer suddenly decides that they have COVID-19.
Good, yeah, good question.
Or tries to amend the contract to add.
Sally, good question. So my first thought would be, let's try not to create a problem that doesn't yet exist.
Okay.
You know, we need to, and you've got to make a judgment call on the kind of clients you have. Some clients get overwhelmed very easily, very quickly, and you bring forward a few problems and they just freeze and they don't, you know, and they all of a sudden just go into a tizzy. And then they say, well, I just can't deal with this and I'm going to terminate the contract and, you know, go through that process. So, but now that we know about this, one of the things we should be doing with our sellers as we're entertaining offers with or without this addendum is we need to be more aware of the buyer and what the buyer's circumstances are. Doesn't mean we couldn't have a buyer that's perfect right now, everything is great, and then 2 weeks from now, somebody in their family gets it, and they get it, and all of a sudden they can't close. We understand things could happen, and everybody needs to be aware, and most people are, that we're in a new world with this COVID-19 situation, and it's going to cause things to happen. They're going to be contractual things. We're going to have sellers, for example, say, you know what? We're in a contract. I don't want any more exposure. I don't want anybody else in the house. Well, we got inspectors, we got appraisers, you know, we've got contractors, we got roofers, we got foundation companies. We got all those things that are contractually obligated in the contract. And so we're going to have people say, I just don't want to do that. I mean, we just had a transaction recently where the seller said, no, I don't want any more roofers out here. They've been out here once. They're not going to come out here again. That's it. We're going to have to be able to deal with that. I mean, that's a reality in this situation, and to the degree to which you can, we need to help our clients understand, we understand your concerns. Well, let's try to work through this. Let's talk through this. Let's deal with it. But you're going to have that, and you're going to be prepared for it. And there's some things that contractually we can't get past. And in every case like that, if we've got a seller who just says, you know what, I know I agreed to that in paragraph 7A of the contract, but I don't want anybody out to the house now. No more. We're in a contract until closing. You need to advise that seller to get some legal advice. You need to have them talk to an attorney because they're not performing according to the terms of the contract.
No, we've already covered all that. It's been inspected, all of that. Everything, all's done.
Okay, so now we move towards closing.
Any more showings?
No, okay, and that's fair. So a seller who says, you know, we've done everything, I don't want any more showings, the seller gets to make that decision. That's an easy instruction to CSS or to Showtime or whoever now, and say no more showings and give them those instructions, because the seller doesn't have to continue to have showings. What you need to make sure, though, is any more due diligence of the buyer, such as a walkthrough before closing, they're able to do that. And you can give good instructions. But yeah, the seller absolutely has the right at some point in time. In fact, they could do this once they have a contract, and they can give this instruction, even though the seller has the right to continue showings. The seller said, nope, no more showings. Seller absolutely has the right to do that, and you need to be sensitive to that, and you just need to give those proper instructions as we go through it.
Does the seller need to worry in case the buyer's agent decides they're going to drag up this addendum that never existed before?
Well, we've had this happen. We've had it. Remember, an addendum cannot be added to the contract without mutual agreement. And
right.
what the buyer would have to do using the TREC promulgated amendment form is use that to add the addendum, and the seller would have to agree to it.
Okay.
So if all of a sudden you have the buyer side produce that, you say, well, thank you very much. You see it's you and your buyer signed off on this. I'll present this to my seller and let them make a decision, because they don't have to accept it. Absolutely. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for one of the agents on the chat. Said, do we need to send the form to current listings?
I did.
The form being the addendum that we're talking
Yes.
about? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why, if we're in contract, why the seller needs to be concerned with this addendum unless a buyer presents it, then we show it to the seller and we have a conversation. I'm not sure if this is an addendum that I think depending on your seller. So, whoa, should I be worried about this? Have you heard something on this? Has the buyer said something? I'm not sure the seller needs to be given this form. Now, if this contract with this buyer falls through, then before you go to the next one, you might want to have them be aware of it. But certainly in any offering situation, you personally, as the agent, need to be familiar with this form. So if you do find yourself faced with it, that you can have a good conversation with your seller. But I don't think this is a form that needs to be sent to the seller. Certainly any buyers you're working with now, they need to be aware of the form. So if you've got a buyer client, they need to know about the form.
I asked Sergio if he can unmute himself. That wasn't the correct
Yes.
question that he had.
The question is the listing is temporary off the market.
Okay.
So the question is, do we need to send a form so that they're aware that if we get anything on the property, that they need to sign that?
Okay, you need, one of the things that you do need to do, because you probably didn't do it when you first took the listing, now with your sellers, you need to have them sign off on the advisory you have for sellers. You need to do that. So current sellers that you have, and like in Sergio's case where you got a TOM and they're sitting there kind of in their waiting mode, you need to present this, the advisory to sellers and present this to them and let them know here's how we're moving forward relating to the COVID-19. So I think you need to do that with all your sellers. I don't think your sellers at this point in time need to know about the COVID-19 addendum until they receive an offer. But I cannot overemphasize, you, the agent, need to be familiar with this addendum so you can have a good conversation with your seller about what it means.
Okay.
You do that. That make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other good questions, guys? Anything else on this before I go to the next point?
BJ is asking if the buyer needs to, does the buyer need to be aware of the form even if we are already under contract?
You know, that's a really good question. And unless the buyer feels like they've got some real leverage, and guys, you've got to make a judgment call on the kind of clients you have and how this would impact on them making decisions and emotionally. We've already had the situation where there's a contract in place and we're moving forward, and had 3 cases, and in all 3 cases we represented the seller, and the buyer started renegotiating with the seller for a new price using the COVID-19 as an excuse. So if we present this form to a buyer after we're already in contract, and your judgment call this buyer is, ooh, they'll take this now and they'll try to use this as leverage. Because if a buyer is going to try to add this to the contract, they're doing it because they feel like they're in a pretty good negotiating position. And it won't just be this addendum without them also asking for other trade-offs, other price reductions, other things in negotiation. So you need to make a judgment call. I don't think it should be an automatic that after we're in contract that we show this to our buyer. Now, clearly, if that deal falls through and our buyer's now making an offer on something else, every buyer you have before the end of a contract, somebody needs to be aware of this addendum in case they decide they want to make use of it. So you need to have that there. That makes sense? We good so far?
Yes.
Now, there's another, and it's not an addendum, and this is brand new, just this week. And it's a Texas Realtor form, and it's a COVID-19 certification for property access. You don't have this. You also don't have this in this packet because, frankly, this came out after we sent the packet out. We'll put it on our intranet, and we'll do it. And this form, you need to use this form with all of your sellers. And what this form does is it's an access, it's a certification, and it has questions on it that the buyers have, or anybody who accesses the property have to answer things like, have you experienced any flu symptoms? Have you been diagnosed with it? Do you have a test pending? Have you traveled certain areas, foreign countries like Oklahoma, things like that? And it has a place at the bottom for printed names and signatures, and you would make multiple copies of this and you make use of it. I think this is a very good form that deals with property access, and your sellers need to be aware of this form. You need to be aware of it. You need to make use of it on properties as you have showings. Certainly if you do an open house, you want people to have to put their names on here and sign off on it and affirm that these conditions don't affect them. And this is brand new. So we'll get this on the internet. We'll send it out in an email so you have it. But this is a form, and it says models COVID-19 certification for property access. And it's a Texas Realtor form. It's not an addendum or anything. It's a form that be used literally to, if somebody doesn't complete this, they don't have access to the property. Seller says, yeah, nobody gets in my house, vacant or not, unless I've got their name and their signature and they've affirmatively answered these questions. So I think this would be a very valid protection here. So we will get that out to you. This just shows how fluid the situation is, how we're continuing to go through the process, that we're literally getting new information and new things on a daily basis. We're very fortunate in that we've got the Texas Association of Realtors, Texas Realtors Now, who are really working very hard on this, working at all the government levels, trying to work through the situation. We've got the realtors even working with Dallas County to try to get them to modify some of their order to give us more flexibility as an essential service. So we've got some people who are working very hard for us to get us through this and help our clients and help us go through it. Any other more questions on this?
I have a question, Bob.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a buyer that's wanting to go look at, it's Tiffany.
Oh, hi, Tiffany. Okay.
Hi. I have a client who wants to go possibly look a couple of homes in Grayson County. Has there been updates on that county?
I don't have any information on updates on Grayson County. I can certainly check with the local board up there and see what they have. And I know that the CEO up there, and see if they've got anything that's happened. And I haven't heard anything of Grayson County and Sherman and Denison if they've got anything, but we'll certainly find out. Tiffany, if you'll do me a favor and send me an email reminding me to check on that and let you know.
Okay, I will.
And as anybody has information on some of the places, because some of our agents are showing properties in Midlothian and Fort Worth and Arlington, and as you have information on what's going on in those areas, that's helpful for all of our agents to have that information. So thank you if you'll do that.
Thank you.
Bob, this is Brian DeLuca.
Hello, Brian.
How are you today?
You know what? I am doing really well. I can't tell you how stoked I am to be in this first ever Zoom call. And I feel really good because I got Lori here making me get through it okay. And I say how much I appreciate that. This is just the beginning. I mean, this is one of those things that we're going to see happening more and more and more, and we're very excited about it. So I'm doing really good. And we've got 72 people on the call. So this is pretty cool. So what's your question, Brian?
My question has to do with both the form that you just spoke to, and what do you see as a legal liability to the agent and the broker if a seller's property must be taken off the market because a buyer who was unaware they were a carrier brought the virus into the occupied seller's home?
Okay, good, great question. And first of all, let's be clear, this will happen. And the liability is significant. There's no way to close all the liability loopholes. We just don't have that ability to do that. What we've got to do is take action so that we've been as proactive as we can by using the forms and doing the things that I've talked about with our sellers and our buyers. We're essentially saying to all of them, hey, there's a risk. I mean, one of the things that you're saying to your buyer on the form you have them sign off on, hey, we're taking precautions. We're all practicing good practices here, 6 feet, all those things, but there's risk. And buyer, you've chosen to take that risk. So if something happens, fine. Seller, by allowing anyone in the home, you've chosen to take a risk. And there's no way to totally eliminate that risk if they're going to go through the process. The only way a seller can stop that risk at all is just not have their house on the market, period. But we will have situations. We've got one in Rockwall where we've got a listing that we can't have anybody see yet because the seller of the property has been tested positive. He's a police officer over there, and he's been tested positive. And so we'd have to get through the quarantine period, all like that, before we do anything. So the big risk is what'll happen is if somebody comes through a house and then later on it proves to be a problem and somebody begins to go down the road and says, well, the reason that we've got the COVID-19 is that we got it when we saw your listing, and so you're liable. Well, it's going to be very hard to prove that. It's going to be very hard to prove it didn't happen. The liability is huge at this time. We all have to accept that. We go through the business. We recognize that the only way to eliminate any of that legal liability is for us not to do anything. And then the liability is, well, we're all out of business. We don't want that to happen. So yeah, it's a great question, Brian, and we do have the risk. Our job is to make our client aware of the risk so they can make risk-based decisions. Your balancing act, and it is a serious balancing act, is you can't give it to them in such a way that it makes them paranoid, because they're going to see you as creating the problem, and they're going to be frozen. They won't be able to do anything. So we want to do it in a way that helps them make good risk-based decisions, informed consent as we work through it. So if we'll do that, we'll find one, they're very appreciative of our efforts and what we do, and they'll be happy to do business with you. And we had the call, I think it was yesterday afternoon, and Tessa was calling, and I had a conversation with Kristen Flanagan on Kimber Davis' team as she was making calls. People are very receptive to our concerns for their situation and how we go through the process and try to protect them. Because people are needing to do things out there. People need to buy, people need to sell, and they want to work with agents who are very in tune with what's going on here and are helping them work through it in the safest possible manner. So Brian, to your question is, there is risk, there is potential liability, but we accept it. You need to accept it on whatever level you're comfortable with. If you're not willing to accept it, that's okay. Take a 6-month furlough, come back in the fall, and let's see how things look. I'm just kidding on that, Brian. You're not going anywhere. Don't go. Don't leave.
Bob, thank you. And just some feedback. The buyer's advisory notice, very well received last week as I was showing properties over the weekend. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So any feedback I can get along those ways about these forms and how they're being used and accepted will be very helpful. Especially as you say, well, they really like it except Bob for this one paragraph or this one sentence. Can we adjust that? And well, certainly we can, because these are our forms. We created them. So if we need to make some changes on them, we certainly have the ability to do that as you work through it. So we good so far? More questions? Laura, you see other things that I need to address before I go to the next step?
Let's see. I know Jackie did ask, what things can we do to protect? Hold on, let me go back. She said, what things can we do to protect our sellers? I'm having to sift through these messages. Hold on.
Says earnest money lease back when the COVID-19 addendum is present.
Okay, say that again.
The way I read it is, what things can we do to protect our sellers? Earnest money lease back when the COVID-19 addendum is present.
Okay, so if the COVID-19 addendum is used in the transaction, the seller needs to be, and comfortable is probably too strong a word, but the seller certainly needs to be aware of what they've agreed to. And as we all know, in many transactions, we understand what the parties have agreed to in a contract, but our buyers and sellers don't always, because they don't read it. They trust you to have read it. So when the seller accepts an offer using the COVID-19 addendum, the seller needs to understand that they've created a situation where the buyer has more than normal rights to the earnest money. To me, the big risk to the seller in a transaction using this, the seller better have a very flexible closing situation, because it's going to be virtually almost at a whim that the buyer can say, oh yeah, I'm voluntarily chosen to stay at home for the next 15 days, whatever, so we're gonna have to extend the closing 30 days. Anything in the addendum allows that. And so the seller needs to understand that they're willing to do that. They're willing to let this be extended. And if we can't still work this thing out, then either party can terminate, but the buyer gets your earnest money back. Same thing on the financing addendum or contingency we talked about earlier. So seller needs to be aware that it's going to be, if there's any COVID-19 issue that happens on this contract and this addendum is used, in virtually almost 100% of the cases, the buyer's going to get the earnest money. So the seller's looking to any recourse there for the earnest money. This addendum is going to really keep the seller from getting that. Does that answer the question? Does that help with that, Jackie? And Sergio, is that good?
Yes,
So
thank
you being very familiar with this is really going to be important. So you need to know what your seller has agreed to. Now, here's the balance. Having said that, and we've kind of talked about it several times, we need to make sure we explain the risk to our seller in a way that they understand the risk, but we don't want them to automatically use this to not accept an offer that otherwise is a good offer. And what your seller's circumstances are is really important. If this is the first warm body that's shown up, and we've had the house on the market for 6 months and not a lot of interest, and this buyer shows up and they want to use the addendum, the seller is more likely to go along with that. They just hope this buyer buys the house. And just because the buyer uses this addendum doesn't mean the COVID-19 thing is going to come into play. In spite of all the cases we have, and as most of you would know, the DFW area is the highest concentration of COVID-19 anywhere in the state. And so this is a really hot area for that. But it's still low numbers considering how many people we've got here, 7.5 million, whatever the number is, 2.5 million. The reality is just using this addendum doesn't automatically mean it's going to happen. If you've got a buyer who's still committed to buy and moving through the process, then chances are this transaction will still close. But seller needs to be aware of the risk. It happens to be there. But if a seller's sitting here looking at 5 offers and 4 of them have this addendum and 1 doesn't, that's going to kind of lean them to that one that doesn't, provided it's otherwise a good offer. Does that make sense? Are we good with that? Questions on that? Laura, you see anything else we need to do before I move to the next point?
I think we're good.
Okay, so I know we got like 40 chats there, so we got a lot of chat stuff going in there. Good, appreciate that, and we're getting those answers. So in your package here, another thing I want to talk about, there are 2 forms. These are both TREC forms. One is a notice of buyer's termination contract, and the other is a notice of seller's termination contract. You need to be familiar with these because if a buyer is using the COVID-19 addendum and the buyer is going to terminate based on that addendum, this addendum in this circumstance is so new, TREC hasn't, and the Broker Lawyer Committee hasn't amended this addendum to add right of termination based on this. What they've got is the catch-all number 8 on the notice of termination, where the buyer would check number 8, and what he would put on there is it says identify the paragraph number of contract or the addendum, and they would identify the COVID-19 addendum for the reason of termination. Same thing on the notice of seller's termination contract, item number 2 on that, identify the paragraph number, contract, of the addendum. If the seller is terminating, as the seller has a right under certain circumstances to terminate under the COVID-19 addendum, the seller would indicate the addendum is the COVID-19 addendum, and that's why they're terminating. So you need to be familiar with these 2 termination contract forms. So if based on the COVID-19 they're going to terminate, you'd know the best way to be able to use these as you work through it. Questions on that? Working through it, we good? Okay. In your packet, you also have the third-party financing addendum. And I want to touch on this from 2 directions. One, we've talked about this earlier in the COVID-19 addendum, where it gives that buyer that right of termination even when they're past the timeline in paragraph 2A. So the paragraph 2A of the third-party financing addendum is where we deal with buyer approval, and you have a blank in there for a number of days. typically 15 days, 20, something like that. So this timeline has come and gone, and the buyer did not terminate. But if they do find themselves, because of the COVID-19, needing to terminate, then that timeline no longer matters. The buyer, and that's what paragraph B of the COVID-19 addendum does, is it gives that buyer that right literally all the way to closing. But if it's a COVID-19 issue, is why they can't still afford to buy the property, they can get out of the contract and get their earnest money back. So we need to be familiar that when we agree to a contract with the COVID-19 addendum, it impacts on this particular issue right here. The other thing is we still are finding ourselves running into a little bit of a challenge in the property approval. And we just had this happen yesterday with one of our transactions. The property approval now has a timeline, and this can only be used, and this contingent here for property approval, the timeline is only for a conventional, doesn't apply to FHA or VA any longer. But the timeline is if a buyer is going to terminate because of property approval, and we're discovering that there are lenders who may end up not approving the property for a COVID-19 issue. And so, there is no finite list of here are the underwriting requirements that a lender has to meet. Every lender gets to have their own list of underwriting requirements. So for whatever reason, if the buyer's lender says we don't approve the property, lender required repairs or whatever, then the buyer can terminate, but they've got to do it before the third day prior to closing. Unless it's FHA and VA, then it goes all the way to closing. And so, and plus the buyer has to produce something from the buyer's lender to give to the seller where the buyer's lender says, here's why we don't approve the property. So that timeline is there in this situation, even with COVID-19. So that doesn't change that particular situation. Now, where this comes into play in the situation we just had, you've also got a copy of the contract in your package there. Although, most of you don't really need this because you memorize the contract anyway. And yes, I am an incredibly optimistic person. You're right. So in paragraph 7, specifically, paragraph 7E deals with lender required repairs. We just went through a situation fairly recently, 2 days ago, in which there was a property approval issue, and we had the seller, and the buyer's agent kind of made a little bit of threat, says, well, if the seller doesn't, do certain repairs, because these are lender required repairs, the lender is requiring these repairs, came out of the appraisal, and the buyer's agent says, and if the seller doesn't do those repairs, then the buyer's going to sue. And they reference to the third-party financing addendum, which means that that particular agent hadn't read the third-party financing addendum. There is no obligation specifically in the third-party financing addendum that requires the seller to do any lender-required repairs. And in paragraph 7E of the contract, which specifically addresses lender-required repairs, it clearly states neither party is obligated. But if they don't come to some agreement, contract terminates, the buyer gets their earnest money back. But there is no obligation. In our particular situation, it was an as-is contract. The seller had made it absolutely clear. Like the seller even put language in special provisions, paragraph 11. I'm not going to do any repairs. You can ask all day long, but I'm not doing anything. So the seller is pretty clear. I'm not doing anything, even lender required repairs. And buyer, if you want it, you better pay for it or find another lender. But the buyer's agent really thought that this was an obligation of the seller and threatened a lawsuit. And we had to have a conversation. Fortunately, the buyer's agent was with another KW office that we know very well. And I know the broker there very well. And we were able to have a conversation. And the broker calmed the agent down and says, don't be having that kind of conversation. There's no obligation here. So you need to be very clear what is and is not required in case like this, so you can properly advise your seller on what they are obligated to do or not obligated to do. So you need to be able to do that. Does that make semi-sense as we work through that so far? Kind of?
Hey, Bob.
Yes, ma'am.
It looks like I'm going to ask Laura Kellogg to unmute herself because she's got a question regarding leases, and there's a lot of chat. So she could, Laura, if you can unmute yourself.
Hey, Bob. Are we using the current COVID-19 forms for tenants and landlords also?
Well, at this point in time, you know, and you and I kind of talked about this before, this talks about the contract and it deals with a contract sell or purchase.
Right.
As far as I know, and Marvin hasn't told me different, and he would certainly know, that Texas Realtors hasn't come up dealing with leases. And I think it's appropriate, as you and I visited, that we probably need something similar to this to deal with a lease. So if you got a tenant in a situation and they want to enter into a lease and they have something that COVID-19 related that causes them to be able to get out of, you know, pull back or whatever. It's a little different situation in a lease situation because once we have an executed lease, we've got a landlord-tenant scenario and we're totally out of it. And it's different than a contract where the parties have agreed and we haven't had a change in title of possession yet. So there's a little difference there that maybe why Texas Realtors hasn't yet come up with that, because the buyers really, I mean, the tenant's not really committed to anything until, I mean, if they go ahead and execute a lease and then before they actually give the landlord their money, something happens and they say, whoa, we want out of this lease. Right now, there's no provision for that to happen. There's nothing that keeps the landlord from enforcing that lease and going after whatever rent is and the security deposit and so forth. Right now, we don't have that. But it's a much shorter timeline in a landlord-tenant situation than we have in a sale or purchase situation. But we are trying to get TR Legal to really address this and see the degree which we might need to do that.
What about for us, do we need to, if we're representing the landlord or the tenant, do we need to have that same advisory that you're using for buyers and sellers signed?
No, I don't think we would need that.
Thank you.
Now, I do want to add to this, there was a good Texas Realtor in their website talking about property management situations. And even though we're not doing the property management, it asked some questions about if because of the COVID-19, does this let a tenant get out of a lease? And it specifically said no. Says this right now, this is not something that creates a right of termination or early release from a lease. The degree to which the Texas Property Code will address this or that'll change, we don't know. But right now, that's not a right. Now, we do understand that the courts have been given a stay order, and even though a landlord may file for eviction and go through the process, until the court hears it and issues writ of possession, you can't put a tenant out on the streets. They're very clear that court's not going to do that right now. So even though they can file for eviction, people really can't be evicted because the court action won't happen.
Right.
I think there's going to be some real abuse of that. They're going to have tenants who it has nothing to do with COVID-19. It's not because they lost their job or their business shut down. They just don't want to pay the rent anymore.
Yeah.
They're going to use that as an excuse. So there's going to be some room for abuse there, and we have to kind of be on top of that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Anything else before I go to our challenge with, okay, since Dallas County says, can I do showing, does it count as a showing if, and I can't see the rest of it. What does it say?
She's saying,
Elaine?
does it count as a showing if I, as agent, go to the property alone and offer a virtual showing by video where the client is not physically present?
Yeah, great question. And I think that what we've heard now, and it's going to be a risk, is that in Dallas County, they don't want us out at all. They don't think we're an essential person here, essential service. And so if you got stopped, say, well, where are you going? Well, I'm on the way to a house and I'm going to take pictures of. You say, well, you're not essential service, you don't get to do it. So in the thing that we're going to send out to you, I talked about the very first part of the class, we're going to give you the information so you can understand that if you're just going to go to a house to set up for a virtual tour, which by the way, I think is a really good idea. That's a better way to do it. There's a risk and you need to understand the risk you're taking. At that point in time, it's not a risk to you and your clients, it's a risk to you. And clearly you don't have to have permission of the listing agent and the seller to be able to go and do that virtual tour as you work through it. We're seeing adjustments there. I think Erin has been making some adjustments and it has some questions about when she wants to have photos taken for her listings and so forth. And we've had a couple of photograph companies who backed off and who are no longer taking photographs. So we're seeing some real adjustments there. But I think if just the agent is going out, then your primary risk there is to you and not to your clients, and you get to make that risk-based decision. Jim Ellis, I saw something pop up from you about the lease situation, but I didn't see the whole thing. I have a lease listing where a tenant has give 30-day notice refusing to allow property to be shown during the stay-at-home period. Yeah, we've had this several times. I mean, it's amazing. All this stuff as recently as it is, in the few weeks that we really had this aggressive, we've had things happen, and we're seeing tenants in property. We just had one where we had the buyers buying a house, tenants in the property, and there were some access problems there. And we're seeing tenants who say, I understand, I agreed in the lease that I could allow this property to be shown in the last 30 days or 60 days, and that was something was in the lease. And the buyer or the tenant could buy their way out of that, typically by paying a month's rent or whatever to do it. We're seeing buyers saying, because of the COVID-19, we're not going to allow anybody in the property. That's not what the terms of the lease say, and they're making a decision. When you've got a landlord that has a tenant in there who says that, our advice to the landlord is you need to get some legal advice to know what your rights are. Because in the short term, what's the landlord going to do? They're going to say, well, you've got to let people in. Well, the tenant doesn't have to let anybody in. You know, they could block the door. They could do the deadbolt lock. They could keep people from being able to see the property. From a practical standpoint, it's hard to get past that. So the landlord needs to get some legal advice. But we're going to see more and more of that tenants would normally allow the property to be shown during that last 30 or 60 days, and they say, no, we're not going to let that happen. And by the way, we understand that. We understand they don't want to take that risk. And they say, well, let me tell you why. My sweet mom, my 86-year-old mom, who's in a high-risk group on several levels, is in the house. You're going to put her at risk to try to get this thing shown? No. So we're going to have to really be cognizant of all the things going on and try to advise our clients and try to say, hey, you know, let's be cautious, let's work through it. Many investors who will get into a contract on a property and try to show that property to other potential buyers during that contract period, you're all of a sudden going to be able to not be able to do that. And by the way, that's not really something that's allowed or not allowed clearly in the contract. So we're going to see that happen. We're going to have to really be on top of that with our clients, advise them more and more often. We're going to say, you know what, we don't have an easy answer to this. You talk to a good real estate attorney. And what you're going to find, by the way, the real estate attorneys is they don't have an answer. I was talking to a really good attorney, one of the top attorneys in Dallas, and he said, now I asked him, I said, how can they do this? He said, Bob, legally they can't because it's unconstitutional. There are going to be all kinds of violations of people's rights, privacy rights, other kinds of rights as a result of this, and the repercussions are going to be a long time coming. He says right now, from a practical standpoint, some of the things that are in the orders are not even constitutional. But in the short term, we have to deal with it, keep going about our business, take care of our clients, in some way, shape, or form, be safe. That makes semi-sense. I know that's not a good answer to the question, but it is what it is.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
Marcia is saying, will buyer need to provide proof if terminating under the COVID addendum?
Well, leave it to Marcia to come up with a great question. Not that these other questions weren't good. Here's the problem. This is like several places of the contract where it implies. The seller would say, okay, you're saying, but show me. Well, because of the language where it says voluntary or mandatory, even though it implies that you need to in some way, shape, or form prove it, there's no requirement. All a buyer would really have to say is, you know what, I voluntarily quarantined myself, and as a result, I've lost my job, and I've quarantined myself because I just don't feel good. What are you going to do about that? There's no way to require proof, and I don't even know what the proof would be unless you were quarantined. You had something that in fact did quarantine. You had an order from the physician, the doctor, or whatever says, yeah, you've been tested positive, and here's the positive test, and here's the document. You can show anybody and say, yeah, here's why I'm quarantined. Other than that, I don't know what you would have. But it's going to be a problem. A seller would certainly say, hey, wait a minute. What the seller needs to understand, if this addendum is used, he's agreed to whatever the buyer's going to want to do. There's just no way of keeping it from happening. We good? Ready for the next point? We have any more quick questions before I go to the next one? Okay, here are two areas that we're having challenges still. And this one of them is directly related to the new environment we're in with the COVID-19, and that's delivery of the option fee. There's nothing in the contract that because of the COVID-19 that gives us any latitude, any extended time frames or anything to deliver the option fee. But many offices are closed, certainly closed on the weekends. Some of them are closed even during the week, so that only accessed by agents who have keys. So if you've got the buyer, you need to really take extra precaution to coordinate with the listing agent on how to get that option fee. What we're finding listing agents are doing is they're saying, please, please, please leave it at the title company. And your answer is, please, 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 no, don't do it. But you've got to coordinate with them in some way, shape, or form. We understand the reluctance of people wanting to have contact, go through the process, and say, please, leave it in the mailbox, leave it at the house, leave it whatever. Our buyer needs to make a decision and help us determine the risk, because the risk to the buyers, they don't have the termination option and they can lose their earnest money. But it's really going to be very incumbent upon you to coordinate with that listing agent how we're going to get the option fee to you in the time frame that we're dealing with, because it's going to be a problem. Many offices, you just won't have that availability at the front desk to tender it and to be able to get it signed off on and receipted. So you need to really work through that. Did we have
Bob,
a funny one here?
Bob?
Oh, yeah, I do need to take a sip of Coke. Let me have a sip right here.
Bob, while you're sipping on your Coke,
I wondered why Lori was laughing. Yes, sir?
Hey, Zelle was an option for a buyer to deliver option fee money to a seller.
What was an option?
Zelle, it's sort of like
Zelle,
Venmo. Yeah,
Venmo,
Zelle
yeah,
was
and
an
they're going to
option.
be, and I think we're going to see more and more use of electronic services. We just need to make sure that whoever we're sending it to, seller or a listing agent, that they're on board with it and that they're in a position where they can accept it. I think you're absolutely right. We're going to see more and more of that happening. And it's
It was
probably
actually
a good thing.
it was actually requested by the seller to have the option fee delivered via Zelle.
Okay, and if the buyer is able to do that, or buyer's agent is able to do that, I think it's a great solution. By the way, we're going to see that same thing on earnest money, electronic earnest money. We just received recently an email with a printable check. Fathom that's how Fathom pays a lot of their checks, Fathom Realty. And so we're going to see that type of thing happen to really reduce, to the best degree possible, person-to-person interaction. So we're going to really see that kind of thing happen. So, but the key is you need to coordinate it. So if the seller made the request, that's a great situation. Buyer's agent just needs to be able to do it. But as a buyer's agent, make sure you've coordinated with the option to get that done and make sure you can do that. Anything else on the option? I cannot overemphasize, especially if you've got a cash buyer and it's not a mandatory HOA and you've got the seller's disclosure notice, your buyer, that's about your only right of termination is that option, that paragraph 23. So you need to make sure that's well coordinated, or you've got a cash buyer who may well lose that earnest money. Now, speaking of the earnest money, we still are having a little bit of a challenge. And by the way, coordinate, if you've got the buyer, make sure you've coordinated with the title company how they want you to deliver the earnest money. Because title companies are working out a lot of different ways to help, hold down the interconnection with people, whatever way to do it. So be sure you coordinate that. But here's the thing that's still misunderstood. In paragraph 5, the earnest money paragraph, it creates a timeline where the buyer has to tender to the escrow agent, i.e. the title company, the earnest money in 3 days. If the third day is a weekend or legal holiday, it goes to the next day that is not a weekend or a legal holiday. But the way we get to the 3 days is calendar days. So if you have a contract and the effective date is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, calendar days, the third day is Sunday, it'll go to Monday unless Monday's a holiday, it'll go to Tuesday. So the way you count the days is calendar days. All counting of all days in the contract and every addendum of the contract are calendar days. Now the next confusion is when that 3 days passes, however it passes, weekend or if it's everything during the week it passes, there is no automatic termination of the contract. It does not automatically terminate. Lack of earnest money does not void the contract. What it does is it gives the seller a right to terminate the contract. No obligation. Seller may say, okay, I understand with all this stuff going out there, why it's taking them 4 days or 5 days, so I'm willing to give them extra time. It's a good contract. I want to stay in it. So the seller can wait. But at some point in time, the seller may say, it's been 6 days now. I just don't want to keep waiting. Then the seller can terminate the contract, provided they terminate it before the buyer finally delivers the earnest money to the title company. If the seller tries to terminate it on Thursday afternoon, but Thursday morning the buyer went in and got to the title company, the seller no longer has a right to termination under that provision. And that's in the seller's termination contract. That's one of the options in there. So we need to make sure that not having that earnest money doesn't mean we don't have a contract. It just deals with the rights of the seller in terminating the contract. Questions on that? Does that make semi-sense? We good? I see people are putting in here all these other options, Venmo, go to Option Pay, Zelle. Those are all good. And I think we're going to see more and more and more of those as you work through it. So we've covered a lot of stuff, and I had no sense of the timing of this. I wasn't sure if it was going to be the 2 hours, but we've gone through a lot of stuff, had a lot of good questions. I really need to get your feedback now and any additional questions as you go through this to make sure we cover it. And I do want to kind of summarize some of it. We're going to, hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll get something out to you on the best practices that we're going to advise the agents about. Can you hold an open house in Grayson County or wherever like that? And we're going to talk about your risk in doing that so you can make a risk-based decision. At this point in time, based on my most recent conversation with leadership, I don't have anything that says we're going to say to you, here's your absolute prohibition. You cannot do this. We're going to tell you, we're going to dictate to you. The only thing that I can think is we would dictate to you is if you're not being safe and have safe practices, we're going to really be all over you. Say, hey, well, you're putting all of us at risk. So other than that, it's your business. You're an independent contractor. We want to support you in building your business and doing it. And I will tell you, I do think that that's who we are for you, even though I've got a little bit of a tendency, I go a little bit to the far side on this where I kind of want to say, no, here's some hard and fast rules. That's just not the real world anymore. We don't have very many hard and fast things anymore, too many things. So we're going to get that out to you so that hopefully that'll help you. Please understand this is very much a work in progress, and we're absolutely trying to help you with all of this to work through this. And we want your input, and we're willing to make adjustments and working through this in every way we can. Follow-up questions? Anything else anybody has out there? Because I'm pretty close to being done. And Lori, thank you very much for being through this with me and helping me work through it and trying to get these things done. So Lori is saying that the COVID forms are on the intranet, so please check that out. Make sure that you've got those and work through that, and we can get those things done. Any last things here? So you would say, Jillian? Okay, good. Thank you. Anything else you guys have? If not, Lori, you have anything else that we need to do?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm good, and I'm going to adjourn this meeting and thank everybody for being here. We had lots of good participation, and we look forward to whatever you do, and please let us know what we need to help you. Thank all of you very, very much. Have a good rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.